despite the fact that fifth-generation fighters and stealth missiles first appeared in the West. They have been fully realized in our country. We're talking about the combination of the Su-57 and the X-69, which we'll discuss today. Let's start a bit further back. What is the X-69? In short, it is a subsonic tactical missile designed for fifth-generation fighters. Hence, its characteristic square shapes inherited from its predecessor, the X-59 Mach 2. The missile weighs 770 kilograms, which is dictated by its impressive warhead weighing 300 kilograms, as well as fuel for a range of up to 300 kilometers. The main feature of the missile is its highly advanced stealth technology. It is almost impossible to detect or intercept, even with its subsonic speed. Overall, it's quite an interesting missile, with unique characteristics and very serious capabilities. And recently, there's been some news on the other side. About a week ago, our VKS Russian Aerospace Forces began using an updated version of the X-69, now equipped with a cluster warhead, which brings up a number of different conclusions. The first and most important one is that the replacement of the warhead suggests the emergence of special targets. You wouldn't send such an expensive missile to a regular trench, whose main purpose is to bypass air defense systems. That's what the UMC Universal Multi-Purpose Cluster and RBK-500 cluster bombs are for. No, this is something else, perhaps some concentration of equipment, but a cluster warhead isn't particularly effective against them. What if the target is aviation? After all, aircraft are particularly vulnerable to such munitions. And now things get really interesting. If the theory about targeting enemy aviation is correct, then our VKS must be catching them at so-called bouncing airfields, because they have few planes left, and their main bases are either in the western part of the country or with the partners. So, a bouncing airfield is one of the few places where an aircraft can be caught during maintenance. And if we're talking about old Soviet-era aircraft, it's not as important because there are plenty of specialists across Europe. But when it comes to F-16s, the situation changes rapidly. This is why simply shooting them down in air combat is not the most effective tactic. And that's where our Su-57 comes into play, the primary carrier of the X-69 missile. Its task is simple and clear: to stay 250, maybe 280 kilometers away from the target and wait for the best moment. While the enemy aircraft is on the ground being serviced, the missile is already on its way. By the way, the entire flight takes a maximum of 20 minutes, so the X-69 will certainly make it there in time. The Iskander would accomplish the task much faster, as the 9M7-3 missile takes just a few minutes to reach its target, but it's not always usable. Sometimes you need something long-range, and the combination of the Su-57 and the X-69 is just the right fit for that. What's most interesting here is that the advantages of stealth technology, often criticized in the context of our fighter, are becoming evident. It can fly deep into enemy territory, and radar stations have difficulty detecting it. The described tactic is interesting because it reveals the key advantages of the fifth generation, and doesn't give the enemy a sense of safety where it was previously unreachable. However, every action has a counteraction. Sooner or later, the enemy will adapt to our tactics, meaning we need to address this issue in advance. The only option is a longer-range missile, but there's a catch. If we're talking about subsonic missiles, they'd need about half an hour to cover 500 kilometers, during which time the target can evade the strike. This is even more of a problem for distances of 1,000 kilometers or more. Previously, our VKS acted similarly, equipping the X-101 missile with two-cluster warheads. But after a couple of strikes, the enemy adapted. In general, we need a long-range, fast missile. Hypersonic? That would be great, but no. To launch hypersonic missiles, you need to fly high, which increases the risk of detection, whereas our Su-57 launches the X-69 at low altitudes. However, if there were a hypersonic missile that could fly quickly and low, the situation would change dramatically, and such a project exists. the Gremlin are deprogrammed. Based on published data, the missile may not be the fastest, but it's much more interesting than its subsonic counterparts with a maximum speed of Mach 6, or about 7,000 kilometers per hour. The range is up to 1,500 kilometers, but the key here is the flight altitude. According to some reports, the missile differs from the Dagger by following a low-altitude trajectory, allowing it to remain undetectable by radars, thus avoiding detection at the bouncing airfield. What's interesting is that the Gremlin was supposed to undergo testing in 2023, but there's been no official news about it. There are several reasons, but two main ones: secrecy due to the missile's extraordinary capabilities or classic delays, due to the complexity of the project, or perhaps a shift in priorities. Who knows? On the other hand, hypersonic missiles aren't the only candidates. There are also supersonic missiles. For example, the P-800. This missile has long needed an air-launched version, but we'll talk about that next time.